All right, comedy, mushroom, cult, podcasts. I was gonna do like a whole episode in front of this, but unfortunately, it appears, not it appears. I got COVID over the past weekend and maybe some change. So hey, December, December always wins in this household. Last year, today, recording this part on Monday, the power was out and I have COVID, so I just like sit in my house with my own thoughts and like reading, and like couldn't do this and piece it all together and encapsulate my weekend. Even though breathing's not like the best, this is the longest I've gone talking without coughing in a couple of days. It gets in the way of stand up. Maybe we'll go over it at some point. Damn it, thought we could make it. Sorry. But we're doing this real quick. I did an interview with Orion Trunk. We go over it in the interview a little bit. He's a comedian from Provo, Utah. I met him in Salt Lake City on tour with our friend Tyler. So that's what the rest of the interviews or the episode's going to be. I was planning on doing a beginning part and all of that, but you can hear it. If you have the video, I look good because, I mean, come on, the camera loves me. But I'll probably do a makeup episode, maybe a full length one, maybe a shorter one. But that'll just be on the Patreon. So if you want an extra episode, patreon.com/WIRR. Otherwise, there's not gonna be a song on this one because I don't know. I don't feel like splicing it all together. It's been a few days. So please forgive me. But here's the rest of the episode. It was fun from what I remember. I did it on Thursday because timing works differently. But no, it was good. Learned a lot. It was a very fun conversation about different ideas and even like different looks about certain religions and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's a fun. That's the cool part about comedy is it's a fun mix of like you get to meet a bunch of people. And I was telling somebody about it the other day of like it's a shock how much I don't know about people that I like quote unquote work with. Um, like I have plenty of friends that I consider like very close friends that I've never met most of their family. I don't know what they do for a job. I don't know. I don't know anything other than they do comedy, and that I tend to like them as a person. And I would have never met them if it weren't for comedy. So that's the same thing as Orion. He's got YouTube that I'll link into the comments of the podcast, but it's Orion Trunk on everything. He's a good dude. I like him very, very much, and enjoy the episode. Thanks. I always forget that like that lady's voice says things before it starts. So like I always count people in anytime I'm doing an interview and before I hit the button just to like try to be helpful. And then it's like, oh, the lady's gonna tell you exactly when we're recording. It doesn't have to be a surprise. Um,
Yeah.
so, Comedy Mushroom Cult podcast, we're doing an interview with a comedian, financial aid helper, lover of Salt Lake City outdoors, Provo outdoors, father of children, husband of a wife. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Orion Trunk to the podcast. Hello, Orion.
Hey there, how's it going?
It is good. I just want to do like a quick background so people know how we know each other. Myself, if we're gonna use good grammar, myself and Tyler Ross, also friend of the podcast in a old version, and just a good life partner at this point, pretty much. Not sexually and relationship wise, but he is a partner in business and overall life. We talk every single day, pretty much. Um, we did a West Coast tour, started in LA, went to Reno, Boise, and then down to Salt Lake City, where we met Orion and Brian Higgins were on a show. And I think I told you this when we were in Salt Lake. You were my favorite person to send in a video. because I'm not gonna just steal away, like I'm not gonna hide or like take away the magic on it. But like the two shirt bit that you have was maybe the funniest thing I had seen all of last year. So when Tyler showed me that video, I was like, I don't care who else is on the show. I want to meet this dude. So we did a show at a weird like used bookstore, and my favorite part is you did the bit when it was outside and dark, and that's like that's how committed you were to the bit.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, that was a good time. I enjoyed that a lot, and it was cool hearing that too. Just because I mean that's what every aspiring comedian wants to hear is that they have something memorable. That it's not just some recycled material from memes or whatever.
Yeah, and especially like in like that region too, because like that was what kind of surprised me. I mean, everywhere's got comedy now. Like it's not a big surprise when you can go to like the middle of a desert and I'm sure there's an open mic. But like in Salt Lake and Utah overall, like when you think of like Utah and Salt Lake, you think of the Tabernacle, you think of the Church of the Latter-day Saints, you think of no alcohol. Like you think of things that like don't really um think of comedy, but like I don't know, Wise Guys is one of the best clubs in the country, and I don't like there's that, but like is there like a big functioning scene out there to like get involved in comedy more?
It does seem like it's popping up, and I mean you're right because most people in Utah don't seem like they would have a sense of humor because there's nothing to really laugh at as far as they're very sober minded is the mindset that it seems to be. I've lived out here for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years now. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of big cultural things, and I think that seems to be the biggest part that people find in comedy out here is just that dichotomy of LDS culture versus the rebels who go out and sing Disney songs loud on a Saturday night and they think they're being rebellious, and so they're like, yeah, we're fighting the system because we're singing along to non-Disney movies in the parking lot instead of just the regular Disney movies. So there's kind of that rebel culture, but it's funny because it is kind of a new rebel culture because to them what they're doing is not usually very rebellious. It's like wearing pants to church and stuff like that, which is rebellious to the culture, but it's funny because you hear other comedians who just go off on crazy stuff, and then in Utah it tends to be very dry as far as what they think is funny and what they don't. So it's a pretty niche market most of the time, but still
Well, that
funny.
also like I mean it's still like cuz like Brian's good. Like I would like just because you're the only two people I've seen in that area. Like Brian seems more, and are you in LDS or are you just like Salt Lake or
Yeah, I mean I grew up with that culture and it's still something that is
okay.
definitely part of it, but yeah.
No, I super judge you, and I think it's great that you only share your one wife on social media and not the rest of them. But no, I grew up in a town where like there was a pretty good like LDS Mormon, not like I mean it's obviously not Provo, Salt Lake City, like like the motherland. But like there were like families, and they would be very good at like answering questions about it. So like literally until I don't know, college, I only thought of like Mormons and people in the church of the LDS and all that. Like, I was just like, oh, they're just super nice and don't drink caffeine that often and don't have like that's all I knew about it. And then people are like, oh no, there's crazy stuff. But like, that's with everything. Like, that's not. It's always a very funny thing when people are like, oh, they're Mormon. It's like, yeah, but you're also Baptist. So like who's crazy? You know what I mean? So it's like one of those fun things. But like in that kind of pressure cooker of when like the church is there, like that they I don't know if they like own Salt Lake, but like they're a big presence. And like that also kind of sets up that weird just on the opposite side, you see it so many times. Like in a very like conservative, like tight-knit city, there's always like that counterculture of like, we're gonna tear this whole thing down and like make fun of it. So it's like I'm more interested in like that middle side of like because everywhere else, like I live outside of Milwaukee and like our spots are like it's it's not so much religious, but it's like historically Milwaukee was like redlined crazy, so like African Americans live in a completely different part of Milwaukee than white people, and like so there's like a weird cultural thing of like if you make jokes about anybody who doesn't look like you, people know that they're not supposed to like laugh at certain things, but because they don't like incorporate with those people that often, there's not like that, oh, this is an acceptable thing to laugh at. So I'm interested in like when somebody comes in and like has some sort of like fun little jab at like the tabernacle or any of the leadership or anything like that, like a reasonable person making like a good joke about it won't need to like overcompensate because they like know where the line is. So like some people will be like, well, we shouldn't make fun of them, but like people who are like in the church might find it funny because it's like, oh yeah, like they understand us and they're making fun of it.
Yeah, and some of those jokes from Milwaukee probably wouldn't fly here because most people out here don't even know black people, so they'd be like, "Wait, they're actually half and half. That's weird. How do you do that?" So
Yeah.
it is, but yeah, and I've heard jokes like that at some of the open mics where they will kind of be like, and just to clarify, like a black person is someone, and like they have to because it's definitely part of the truth that there's definitely some diversity out here, but we are definitely one of the least diverse populations I think in the country for a variety of reasons. So you definitely try to poke fun and do things. I mean, as long as you always punch up and don't punch down, that's usually kind of like the rule one of comedy. Is as long as you're not berating them or kind of opening up trauma and stuff like that, it's pretty fair game. I mean, there's definitely always going to be because this part of the culture is definitely judgmental. It's definitely a lot of judgmental people in those close knit religious societies, like you talked about. So there's usually going to be some judgment, but as long as you don't care about it, which comedians shouldn't. I mean, because everybody's going to judge you no matter where you go. But people in the South don't like it probably when I do some of my Southern joke humor that I do every now and then. But it's as long as you, like I said, as long as you punch it up and don't punch it down, it's usually fair game.
Yeah, and that was like the fun part of like that, especially that show that we did, and like you brought your family, and especially like now, and it was like one of those like I could kind of assume you never want to assume, but like now you never want to be like the first time you meet somebody, you're like, yo, which God, like you don't want to be like, you, which one? I mean, I'm known to do that, but like I'm trying not to be as abrupt on it. Um, because I mean, when I ask, it's like out of like interest. It's not like I want to know who you are, so I know what to say. It's like more of like, okay, cool. I can kind of see the angle you're coming at, so now I can like understand you better and see it that way. And so like, there's not like that weird crossover. But like my act at that time, and I mean, I still have some of it. It's just like it was like sacrilegious is like a word you could put on it at certain points, and then like your poor family who's like coming out to see you perform and like doing nice things. It was like you doing like, and it's very funny when people are like doing something more clean. A lot of times people think it's like like an undercutting of it, but like it's very funny, but it's like cleaner. And then like Brian, I would say, is like more closely to like standard online like mainstream comedy trying to like reach for things. Tyler does, I call it like pop comedy of like it's very good but it's not gonna like, and he like hits the right notes and like will like hit sensitive things but like very softly, where like I'll just be like fuck it, we're going in. And so it's just like one, it was a very funny show, but then it was like seeing your poor family like being like, we signed up for like nice fun, and then this doofus from Wisconsin is in here like calling out Jesus for like half of his act. It was a very interesting dichotomy there.
Yeah, no, and they like that. I mean, we listen to comedy stuff all the time. I mean, I don't have my kids listen to like Richard Pryor yet or anything like that, but I mean,
Yeah.
comedy is a pretty fair game. I'm sure some people out here are big, like Brian Regan and Jim Gaffigan and those types of cleaner comics. But I mean, I personally, I put Pandora on and just let it play with whoever, and I have some favorites and things like that. But I don't think they cared too much. Usually, I mean, we make fun of especially cultural elements. I mean, the cultural elements of the church are definitely just things that need to be done away. So if you can do that with humor, it's always better rather than just calling it out. So it's fun to hear it in comedy settings. Personally, I think it's a good thing to joke about.
Well, and that is a
So
cool thing too of like and I'll follow up with an actual question after this, but like I'm doing there was like it's been on my mind a lot lately because I'm working on a bit about Warren Jeffs, and like it's one of those like there's a Mormon guy that comes to one of the mics in Appleton, and like that's a big part of his act is like, I'm Mormon, I don't have a bunch of wives, and it's like, yes, you're playing like the stereotypes, we get it, I understand what you're doing, whatever, but like it's very hard to do. Like I want to do a joke about Warren Jeffs and like the crazy part of like Mormonism, but I also like point out like, hey, when you think of like culture, like when you think of Mormons, you're thinking of people like Warren Jeffs who are like the outside. Like they're not the like most people are just normal people and just like go to a different church than you. And that's like kind of the point of the joke is to be like what you think is like the crazy part is the crazy part. Like you only see like the crazy story part of it. So like this is like how I'm gonna get into it of like, hey, maybe look into it instead of just being like, whoa, Mormons, aren't they crazy? It's like, no, Mitt Romney was almost president 10 years ago. Like, you can't, I mean, you can be president being crazy. We found that out, but like, you can't do it if you're like that super crazy. But like with that, like you said that you have like some of your favorite comedians. Like, what kind of comedians did you come up to? Because like when I was growing up, like I didn't come from any sort of like religious family of any sort. Like I got our family to go to like a Lutheran church when I was in second grade. Like other than that, they never went. So like we had like Chris Rock. I mean, my dad loved Red Fox because he like grew up in like a black neighborhood in Toledo. And like, but like the first one that like really caught me, was like first it was the Blue Collar Comedy Tour, is like the first one I remember, and then it was like Dane Cook. So like you kind of go into like blue collar of like that clean but like kind of like dumb comedy, and then you're just like, all right, we're gonna go into like a dirtier dumb comedy, and then you're like, oh, there's like all this other shit. So I'm interested like where you jumped off, if you like, I don't know like your upbringing, but like it had to have been like pretty interesting to like find comedy and be like, oh, this is a thing.
yeah, that's a good question, and I like that you didn't let me talk about Warren Jeffs or anything. That's probably wiser because he does put the mental and fundamental religion for sure.
Yes.
But he yeah, as far as upbringing and stuff though, I'm the youngest in my family, which I it's always interesting to see how biases and things like that affected because like I grew up watching Nick at Night back when it
Mhm.
was like especially older. So like the Bob Newhart show, Odd Couple, Taxi, Happy Days, those types of shows, even though I'm whatever generation I am, Generation X or millennial or whatever the term
How old
is.
are you?
40, so it's like right in
Okay.
that.
Yeah, you're at the elder millennial.
Yeah, but like I said, I grew up with people who, my brothers listened to metal music. My dad loved old TV shows. My mom did too. So I grew up with Bob Newhart being like one of my favorite people,
Hmm.
which is not something you see with people with my hair color. Like I went to see him in concert I saw a show of his like back when we lived in Florida. So like about 8 years ago. And I was legitimately the only person there with brown hair. Like everybody else had, gray hair and
Yeah.
asking if they're awake or dead type of thing. So I always liked older comedian. Red Fox was definitely a fun one too. I didn't really listen to his albums, but I loved, Sanford and Son and things like that. So I definitely came in it from the sitcom element, and then Saturday Night Live was big because again, my older brothers were definitely of the era of Sandler and David Spade and Chris Farley. So that's what I grew up watching, and then so I got to see a lot of that type of element. SNL is a big influence. Steve Martin, learning about women comics because Saturday Night Live is not really necessarily great back then, especially about women comics. So just trying to learn about them. But I love Mary Tyler Moore, Betty White, a lot of those old sitcom comedians. So I learned about them through their show, and then realized, which is still true today, that most comedians, most TV shows started with some comedian. You know, you have Tim Allen doing Home Improvement, you have
Mhm.
Seinfeld, of course, doing Seinfeld, and Roseanne doing Roseanne. A lot of that mentality. So I really kind of fell into it with TV shows, and then realized, like, oh, they actually do stand up and they do bits. So I would pull up, I have some of the records behind me here, the Newhart, Smothers Brothers, Steve Martin, a lot of those guys, Flip Wilson, a lot of those. And I wasn't huge into some of the crazy stuff, Eddie Murphy and stuff. I know I need to listen to Raw and some of those ones too, but
I think
but
that's
yeah,
overrated. I think that's not to interrupt you, but like I think and I could be wrong, and especially with like comedy stuff, I'm completely open to being wrong about a lot of things because my biggest thing with it is like and my dad like I said, instead of like SNL, my family was like an in living color family because like my dad grew up on like the south side of Toledo and he was like one of like three white kids in his graduating class. So like that's who his friends were talking about is like Martin was like our Seinfeld in my house. So it was like kind of and it's very weird because like I grew up in the suburbs of like it's like an all white town, but like you kind of grow up in you don't want to say you grow up in black culture, but like that's like more of like who I kind of saw when I was growing up. But it's like when people are like, "Oh, you got to go back and watch Raw and Delirious." And it's like I've seen parts of it, but that was what 40 years ago at this point. Like why do I need
yeah,
to go look at what's being done 40 years ago? Cuz it was great. I mean, it was groundbreaking and it was like amazing back then. Eddie Murphy was 20 or whatever. Like that's incredible that he did it that well. But like if you go back and listen to like any old comedy, like if you go back you're just like, "Oh, we're past this." I don't think like it's important to like know the history, I guess, but like I don't know. Do you need to go back and watch Raw or Delirious now to like be good at comedy? I don't think so. You know what I mean?
yeah. No, that's a good point. I think everybody's got what makes their foundation, and that's I think what's good. And it's good to like stretch out and see, like, oh, like I should be more, you know if you find yourself in just a very specific tunnel of comedy, then it is good to branch out. And I need to be more physical, so I should watch more Chris Farley type stuff, or more whatever, or I need to be more on edge, so maybe I should listen to more, Eddie Murphy or any of those guys. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it has to be. It might help explore more ideas, but it certainly doesn't. But it is funny that you mentioned Martin, because I remember recently I tried to say a dang Gina once to somebody and they didn't know what I was talking about, especially in Utah. But I was like, dang,
I don't know if their numbers were very good in the Provo area.
I doubt it. There's probably one person that watched it out here, but
Um, other like another like regional question because like I live in Wisconsin now, and one of the big things is like shows will cancel or like stop running in the summer a lot because it's like it's gonna be winter from October, November through March. Let's enjoy the summer. Let's go outside. It's gorgeous here, but like it is nothing compared to Utah. Like Utah has made I haven't shut up about it in a year because one, you have that giant fucking mountain overlook. And I'm sorry if like people can hear me in your office, but like that's the
no.
only way that like you can say like every morning going out and looking out there and just seeing the mountain looking over your town. You could go 10 minutes out of SLC and like when we were driving and like even on that trip we were driving so much because everything's so far away so we didn't have like a bunch of time, but it was like, okay, we need to stop and like just soak this in. Like the natural beauty of that place, just like fighting against I mean hiking. I would like just fighting against that, getting people to show up to shows. Like what is that like versus like, hey, we can go outside and just be entertained in like some of like the nicest place. Why are we gonna sit in a dark room and listen to knuckleheads?
Yeah, it's hard to say, because I mean, there's definitely a niche group of people that do like to go outside and hike and see all that. There's a lot of lazy people too, though, so I think that kind of and there's a lot of like, we have families out here with 20 kids, so like we need to get free entertainment however we can, and comedy shows are usually close to free most of the time. So I think that helps when it's, hey, we got to have our group approved date night because that's our culture in college, because
Mm.
because they have like soaking out here and whatever else, like all kinds of crazy stuff that I'm super glad that I'm not dating out here, because it would just be a nightmare of. But like that's what they do. This, hey, it's Monday night, let's do our little group date night and do stuff. What's free? And then they go to the comedy show, and Monday night is family night, so they go out for like their group date night at the comedy show. So I think there's enough trade-off to where, what's cheap, what's theoretically clean, or what's, you know am I allowed to drink in there? Because some of the comedy clubs I think let you drink. So if you're trying to be that rebel, it's like, hey, where can we go to drink? Hey, let's go inside here, this is great. We probably won't be seen because they're going to be doing a bunch of swearing in here, and we know our bishop's not going to be here and stuff. So,
Yeah, and
there's
that's what I loved about Salt Lake is like I don't drink. So like that was like part of like if I wasn't trying, and obviously like Salt Lake's a great city, and like I don't want to be like you can't get famous out of Salt Lake because I'm sure it's happened. Wise Guys is great, good acts come through there all the time. But like the next closest city's like 12 hours away or whatever with like a scene.
right.
So like that's inconvenient, but like coffee shops, like some of the best coffee I've ever had was just at like a random coffee shop in like on like Ninth and Ninth. I just like went to a coffee shop there, and it's like, yeah, man, like it's got to be good because like a lot of people like this is their bar is going to coffee because like they're not going to the bar. So that's got to be interesting and fun because like you have to be because like a lot of times like that's who you're performing for is like a drunk audience. So like they're just like yeah, where like you actually have to like be good and like have good thoughts. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, there's a video clip where Jerry Seinfeld even talks about, is the joke funny because I put the F word in it, or can I make it funny without that? As far as like, because clean comedy definitely gets it's punishment that way of like, oh, you don't say swear words, so it's not gonna be as funny. But there are legitimate comedians who do try to focus on that of, is the joke funny because I'm swearing, or because the, like you mentioned, that because the audience is drunk, or can it be a legitimate, completely sober, non-diverse audience, and can I still make people laugh? And if you can, then in theory that should make you stronger for other audiences and stuff like that.
I love that what you're talking about, and I don't know, like I know the original one, of him like saying like the F word is like a Corvette,
Yeah.
like it's just like sleek, it's fun. But like, have you seen the comedians on comedy thing? It's like an old HBO thing. It was like Ricky Gervais,
Mm.
I believe Chris Rock, Seinfeld was there, and then Louis C.K. And they
Yeah.
were like talking, yeah, like they were talking about how like I think it was like Louis said he thought like he's like, yeah, saying the F word is cool, it's like a red Corvette. And then he remembered that like Seinfeld collects Porsches, so like Corvettes are cheap. Like it's a very like it's like a very cool and it's one of those things that I like try to remember a lot of times of like, all right, is this getting a laugh because I say the word you're not supposed to say, or like is it funny that's just like an addition to it too.
Yeah, and I think it helps you try to write smarter comedy that way, because some people are like, I love it. I'll listen to some comedy, and the way they place the words, sometimes I have to think like, would that be funnier if it wasn't there? And sometimes I'm like, no, like that really helped punch it up a little bit. But it does help you just think about the elements of comedy, that it's not just the seven swear words or whatever the case is. It's, is this funny because it's funny? So yeah, it's a fun exercise to do that with.
All right, so we're on your lunch break, and I don't want to like take up the whole thing, so you can
Nope,
relax.
no.
We teased it off mic, if you want to do it. But literally like so the night that we did the show together at that crazy bookstore, one of my favorite things because you like share banned books and stuff. I don't know if you went into the bookstore, just an aside, but they had like an old copy of Mein Kampf in there, and like that was the first time like because obviously it's not like a great book, but it's one of those like it might be good to like buy this so like at least one copy still exists so like people can learn from like I'm a very much like we need to know that this exists so like it doesn't repeat itself kind of person. Not because I'm like a big Mein Kampf fan. But like it was a crazy like it was like a crazy bookstore. But like so that show happened and like you had like a tight neck thing going on and like you were obviously uncomfortable and like just like being like hey yo where do you pray at wasn't like a question I was gonna ask. I didn't want to be like um yo I don't want to I don't want to like ask you what's wrong with your neck. Like I don't want to be like that. But then like a few days later you ended up in the hospital, right?
Yeah, yeah, that was a weird time. um, yeah, and it was funny. It was especially funny the uncomfortableness because I was like, there was probably multiple reasons of being uncomfortable, but it was funny because like you, Tyler, and Brian all had like black, red, or black t-shirts, and you kind of looked like everybody was in the same band, and then I'm there with like a button-up t-shirt, like a with like a
Two
dress
button
up.
up t-shirts, two button up shirts.
Yeah. So it was just funny for me from that I was like looking at it, I was like, oh yeah, my comedy is kind of different because I have like the button down mine of Bob Newhart, and you guys have like Louis C.K. and people like
Yeah.
that. And so that part was funny because I was still like, oh wait, am I in the right? But yeah, I actually had sepsis that weekend. It was undiagnosed at the time, but actually within a few days of that show, I was in the hospital in the ER and had sepsis and was like, apparently a lot of conversations behind the scenes of talking about how I probably might not make it and we need to make plans. Like my mom showed up, which I was happy about because she never really flies out for like anything that's not super important, which is fine. But like she was there and we're just having a good, and like in my head I'm like, oh, this is cool. Like I get that I'm in the hospital and it's pretty serious, but then like when I left they were like, no, like you were we were like making some plans because we weren't sure what was going to happen. And because sepsis has been a pretty serious thing, like I've known friends and family, extended family stuff that have died from it, like
Jesus.
with like Grant Hill had it from, if you know Grant Hill from basketball, like he had it and he was pretty serious with it. And it was crazy. But yeah, during the show it was like a sore arm thing and like some fevers and it seemed very much not that serious during the show. But you can kind of tell looking at the pictures that there, and like that night I didn't eat anything. We went out with our friends after the show to eat some dinner and I had like watermelon.
Yeah.
So it's very like very odd experience.
Well, you were
Um,
like visibly uncomfortable, and like that was the other because, and obvious like I would never. I don't want you to think like you are being off-putting or anything like that. I would never like say that because like you're obviously a nice person. You're like conversational and all that, but like you could just tell that you were uncomfortable, and and again like I didn't want to be like, hey, do you not feel comfortable in this setup? And like that was the first time meeting you, so like maybe you just have like a neck thing, you know what I mean? Where you're just like, oh, you're the first person who saw it. So like, that had like just with that, and then like performing through it's very cool. But like, then you didn't eat or anything like that. Was like maybe that show kind of like a hey, maybe we should get this checked out kind of deal?
yeah, I mean that going home that night, because I mean I was on some pain medication right after that. I think that was the first night where it was still kind of just like Tylenol and Advil kind of a medication, and then the next day I got like a prescription and for painkillers and stuff like that. So it was weird just because normally like I have a pretty high threshold for pain, so most of the time I think that's what was challenging about it. Is like I don't know what's knocking this out, what's not knocking this out. And it was the first show I actually did where I had a longer set too, so it's kind of hard to figure out if some of it was emotions or, I mean, I'm naturally just an awkward person, so some of that is probably there too of, but it's interesting to see how visible it possibly looked, because at the time I was feverish a little bit, my arm hurt, but like that was literally it. And I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna like not go to a show because my arm hurts. Like what's the deal there? So yeah, it was after that show, I mean Saturday I think I slept like all day, which is also not that normal. So then Sunday we were like, yeah, we should probably get this checked out. And then I went to the hospital on Monday and they were like, you should have come in like 3 days ago because you're like almost in shock, like septic shock, which
I had a hot
usually
10 to 15 to do, guys. All right. I don't think you understand. Like, the guys got paid in like shitty weed and t-shirts. Okay. Like, I had to be there.
yeah. Wait, you guys got weed? That's great. No, you
No,
guys are
you
getting.
didn't miss out much. We just left California, and then like he's like, "Hey, I didn't have any money. Do you want some t-shirts?" And then like a gram or two of just like garbage, like so you didn't miss out.
I got like a free book, I think, and that was it, which I was happy about. But yeah, it
Yeah,
was.
it rips. Like I'm not gonna complain about it. But what was because like the stupid things running out in like 5 minutes. You said that there was like a fun follow up. What was that?
Well, no, it was mostly almost dying, I think, but it was just funny because I think when I met you guys, you were like, "So what do you guys like find funny?" And I was like, "Well, I broke my neck one time 20 years ago, and that was pretty hilarious." And you guys were like, "That's not really normal." And I was like, "Oh, is that not what people find funny?" And it was just interesting because I remember you guys asking me, and to me most of the stuff that I found funny was like almost dying myself, or like when other people almost die, and like I have a very casual attitude about that. So I think you guys were surprised at that, and so to me it was very funny that I legitimately after that show also almost died. So I'm like, hey, new material, this is great. I was in the hospital for 4 weeks. This is going to do wonders for my career.
Yeah, I
And
was
I don't.
talking to Tyler today about it, and I was like, I gotta record because he wanted to talk earlier, and I was like, I gotta record a podcast with Orion from Salt Lake, and he's like, oh, what's that? Like, what's going on with that? And I was like, he asked if I have anybody on, and I was like, somebody who almost died like 2 days after meeting me. I need to like, I need to get him on the podcast because yeah, like, I mean, and I find weird shit funny too, like, and it's one of those like yeah, it's very strange, and it's always like when I meet a new person, I wouldn't say that I'm like awkward, but like I'm also not afraid. Like I said, I'm not afraid to like ask the question or get into it, but it's also like, oh, you broke your neck like 20 years, like that's interesting. Like let me think about that for a second. Like that's just like a very like okay, cool. Like all right, there's another weirdo. He's packaged differently, but like all right, at least he's just like he's dark, but like in a nice way. That's kind of fun.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting how that works because I know that's kind of the rule of comedy too, is that you have to find things in your life that maybe weren't the best. And I'm usually a very optimistic person, so like for me apparently things like almost dying or close ones who have lived, like I have two brothers, one of them's dead and the other one were just alien, so I talk to the one who's dead a lot more than the one that's like still alive and stuff like that, which is probably not normal. I'm just like, hey man, like at least when you don't talk to me there's a reason, kind of a thing. So it's weird. But yeah, it's just interesting how comedians have to find things that normal situations you just have to, and I've always tried to do that, just find the good in everything and find what makes it funny and find what makes it maybe over the top or not as funny and steer away from those. But
Well, and that was like and I work with like Zoltan Kazis, and to like bring it all back to like the LDS thing, like he got famous from Dry Bar, which is like run by a couple of Mormon dudes. And like that was something last time I saw him. He was like, your act has changed. Cause like I kind of look at my stuff now as like a pop punk of comedy where like I want to like make fun of like the big things and like the dark things, but like in a funny, like a nice positive way to it. So instead of like, all right, we're just gonna go for the jugular every time, I want people to also enjoy like the funny part of that dark stuff. So I don't even know if it's like we have to do that. I just think we have like brains that find that, and then we have that like compulsion, and we have to get other people to be like, right, see this? I'm not insane, right? Like you guys understand this too. All right, last minute. Sorry that we're like rushing through this last part because this could go
uh,
on for like 8 years. But
we,
technology and poverty. Um,
we can always pop them if we had to too, but sorry, go ahead.
we'll figure it out. It's not a big deal. And we could do a part two at some point. It's not like we don't ever text each other. So where can people find you? Do you have a website? Are you traveling? Are you doing stuff like that, or are you mostly local? Just let people know where to find you.
I'm mostly on YouTube right now. Just I post my open mics. I still actually need to post the show that we did for some reason that has been like very backburnered, and I don't know why. So apologies for that. But YouTube, just Orion Trunk, just like it sounds, or probably not because it's a weird name. But Orion, like the constellation Trunk on YouTube. I have some other stuff. But that's where my comedy is. So if you want to see the comedy, the shirt bit is on there, stuff like that.
It fucking rules. All right, man. We'll talk to you later. I'll sign off before it signs us off, and then obviously I'll text you after this. So, thanks for
Awesome.
doing it, and I'll let you know when it's up.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was awesome.
Cool, brother. We'll talk to you
All
later.
right.